The town of Red Hollow was the kind of place where dust settled on everything: boots, windowsills, reputations. It sat between dry plains and low rolling hills, a cluster of wooden buildings clinging stubbornly to the edge of nowhere. Folks there believed in hard work, short conversations, and minding their own business. Except when it came to gossip. Caleb Turner had lived just outside Red Hollow for nearly 10 years. His ranch stood a mile beyond town limits, past a crooked fence line and a stretch of open land where wild grass bent with the wind. He wasn't a man people knew well, and that was exactly how he preferred it. He had once been different.
We have to leave you now.
Once, he had laughed easily.
No matter what.
Once, he had ridden into town with purpose rather than necessity. But life on the frontier carved pieces from a man. Loss shaped him. Silence hardened him.
Can't stay here.
Now he kept mostly to himself.
There's a shelter.
He sold cattle when necessary,
Ain't this a
bought
sight?
supplies once a month,
It's beautiful.
sat alone at the edge of the saloon if he needed coffee.
Right.
Never stayed long enough for conversation to grow personal.
With you every
People
moment
called
feels
him the
like home.
quiet cowboy. They weren't wrong. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in bruised shades of orange and violet, Caleb tied his horse outside the general store. He had just finished loading feed sacks when raised voices cut through the street. Sharp. Angry, he turned. Outside the town's only boarding house stood Mrs. Dillard, a broad woman with a permanent scowl and arms folded tightly across her chest. In front of her stood a young woman clutching a small suitcase. "You've had enough time," Mrs. Dillard snapped. "No pay, no bed, that's how it works." The girl's voice trembled but remained steady. "I just need 2 more days, I can find work."
We have to
Not
leave
my
you
problem.
now.
I know what
The
I'm
suitcase
going
was tossed onto the dirt street.
No matter
The door slammed. Dust swirled in the silence that followed. A few townsfolk watched from windows. Others pretended not to
Can't
notice.
Stay here.
Where can we go?
The girl stood still for several seconds,
Lead the way.
not crying,
Ain't this
not
a sight
shouting,
to behold?
just standing.
Beautiful. Makes you feel small.
Caleb didn't know why he kept
Just right.
watching.
This
Maybe
sunset
it was the
reminds
way
me
she
of
squared her
beautiful
shoulders
endless.
instead of
With you every
collapsing.
moment feels like home.
Maybe it was the way no one stepped forward. Or maybe it was because he recognized that look, the look of someone with nowhere left to go. He adjusted his hat and walked toward her before he could overthink it. "You planning on sleeping in the street?" he asked quietly. She startled slightly, then met his gaze. Her eyes were tired but defiant. "I'll figure something out. Town gets cold at night. I've handled worse." There was pride in her tone. He respected that. "What's your name?" he asked. "Emily." He nodded once. "I've got a spare room." She stiffened immediately. Suspicion flashed across her face. "I don't need charity." Wasn't offering charity. She waited. "It's empty," he continued. "Doesn't cost me anything to let it stay that way. You can work it off if that makes you feel better." She studied him carefully, measuring risk. Caleb understood that look too. "I live alone," he added calmly. "Ranch is a mile out. You're welcome to ask around. I don't cause trouble." Silence stretched between them. Finally, she picked up her suitcase. "If I don't like it, I leave." "Fair enough." He took her bag without comment and walked toward his horse. After a brief hesitation, she followed. The ride out to the ranch was quiet. The sky darkened fully by the time they arrived. His home was modest, a sturdy wooden house with a wraparound porch and a barn set a short distance away. A lantern glowed near the door. Emily dismounted slowly, taking in the open land, the fencing, the wide stretch of stars above. "You really live out here alone?" she asked. "Have for years. Doesn't it get lonely?" He paused before answering. "Sometimes." Inside, the house was simple but clean. A stone fireplace, a worn leather chair, a wooden table marked by years of use. He gestured toward a narrow hallway. "Second door on the left. Bed's made. Sheets are fresh." She stepped inside the small room. A window overlooked the fields. A quilt lay neatly folded across the bed. "It's more than I had this morning," she said quietly. He nodded once and stepped back toward the kitchen. "There's stew on the stove if you're hungry." She hesitated before speaking again. Why? He didn't turn around. Because someone should have helped you sooner. That night, the wind moved gently across the plains. Caleb sat on the porch longer than usual, staring into the dark horizon. Inside, he could hear faint movement, cautious footsteps, the creak of a bed. He hadn't planned on company, hadn't planned on change. But for the first time in years, the ranch didn't feel quite as silent. And inside the spare room, Emily lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering whether she had just made the most dangerous decision of her life, or the safest. Neither of them knew yet that this simple act of shelter would begin something neither expected, not just protection, not just kindness, but love. Morning came early on the ranch. Caleb was already outside before the sun rose fully over the plains. The air was crisp, carrying that quiet stillness that only wide-open land could hold. He half expected to see the spare room empty when he returned. Instead, when he stepped back inside after tending the horses, he heard movement in the kitchen. Emily stood near the stove, sleeves rolled up, attempting to light it properly. "You'll burn your knuckles that way," Caleb said gently. She startled, then exhaled. "I've cooked before, just not on one of these." He stepped beside her, adjusted the vent, and showed her the proper angle. Their hands nearly touched. She quickly stepped back. "I wasn't planning on staying long," she said. "Just until I find work." "You can look in town," he replied calmly. "Or here." She raised an eyebrow. "You don't look like you need help." "Ranch always needs help." There was no pressure in his tone, no hidden expectation. Just fact. By midday, she had tied her hair back and followed him into the fields. She wasn't delicate the way town women often appeared. When handed tools, she used them. When shown how to mend fencing, she listened carefully and tried. Not once did she complain. Caleb noticed, and he respected it. But Red Hollow noticed something else. 2 days later, when Caleb rode into town for supplies, the whispers had already begun. "She's staying at his ranch. Not proper. Man's been alone too long." Mrs. Dillard watched him from the boarding house window with narrowed eyes. Caleb ignored them all. He had learned long ago that defending yourself against rumors only fed them. Still, when he returned home that evening, he found Emily sitting on the porch steps, staring out at the horizon. "You heard?" she said without turning. "Town talks. I don't want to ruin your reputation." He almost laughed at that. "Don't have much of one to ruin." She finally looked at him. "That's not true." It was the first time someone had said that in a long time. Over the next weeks, Emily proved she was no burden. She woke early. She worked hard. She learned fast. More than that, she brought something unexpected into the house, sound. She hummed while cleaning. She laughed softly when one of the goats escaped its pen. She asked questions about the land, about Caleb's past, about why he never married. He rarely answered fully. There were parts of his past he kept buried. Loss had carved deep lines into him, deeper than most people could see. One evening, a storm rolled across the plains without warning. Wind tore at the barn doors. Rain hammered the roof. One section of fencing collapsed under pressure. Without hesitation, Emily grabbed her coat. "You'll get hurt," Caleb warned. "Then we'll both get hurt." They ran into the rain together. Mud clung to their boots. Lightning flashed across the sky. Side by side, they secured the loose boards and reinforced the broken fence. When it was finally over, soaked and breathless, they stood inches apart under the barn's overhang. Rain streamed down her face. Her hair clung to her cheeks. "You didn't have to stay," he said quietly. She looked straight at him. "Yes, I did." The air shifted between them, something unspoken, something growing. But peace never lingers long without challenge. 3 days later, a man rode onto the property, well-dressed, clean boots, city posture. Emily froze when she saw him. Thomas. she whispered. Caleb noticed the tension immediately. The man dismounted with confident steps. "I've been looking for you," Thomas said to Emily, ignoring Caleb entirely. "I wasn't hiding," she replied evenly. Thomas's gaze swept across the ranch with thinly veiled judgment. "You left without a word." "I left because I wasn't wanted." Caleb remained still, but his jaw tightened. Thomas turned toward him then. "You're the cowboy." "Caleb." Thomas smirked slightly. "You really think this is where she belongs?" The words hung heavy. Emily stepped forward before Caleb could respond. "I choose where I belong," Thomas laughed softly. "You always were stubborn." He lowered his voice, but not enough. "You don't have to struggle like this. Come back. There's comfort waiting." Comfort. The word echoed. Emily's expression hardened. Comfort without respect isn't comfort. Thomas studied her for a long moment. "You'll regret this." He mounted his horse and rode away without another word. Silence settled thickly over the ranch. Caleb didn't ask questions immediately. He simply waited. Finally, she spoke. "He was supposed to marry me." The admission felt heavy. He wanted a wife who looked good at dinners, who stayed quiet, who didn't argue. "And you argued." She gave a faint smile. "Every time." Caleb nodded slowly. "Then he didn't deserve you." She searched his face for doubt. There was none. That night they sat closer than usual on the porch. No storm, no tension, just truth. "I didn't stay because I had nowhere else to go," Emily said softly. "I know. I stayed because you didn't try to change me." The wind moved gently through the fields. Caleb took a long breath. "I've lived alone a long time," he admitted. "Not because I wanted to, but because I stopped believing someone would stay." She reached for his hand. "I'm not leaving." Those words struck deeper than he expected. He turned toward her fully. "I don't have grand things to offer." "I don't want grand things." He hesitated only a second longer. "Stay. Not as someone renting a room, not as someone passing through." Her eyes softened. "Stay as what?" "As mine." The vulnerability in his voice was raw, unpolished, real. Emily stepped closer. "You already gave me shelter," she whispered. "You already gave me safety." Her hand rested against his chest. "You already gave me your heart." Under a sky scattered with stars, with nothing but open land around them, she leaned forward and kissed him softly. No audience, no applause, just two lonely people choosing each other. Weeks later, the town's whispers changed tone. "She's still there. They seem happy. Maybe the cowboy wasn't so foolish." Caleb didn't care what they said. For the first time in years, the ranch felt alive. The spare room was no longer spare. The porch no longer empty. And the lonely cowboy who once rode into town with nothing but silence surrounding him now rode with purpose. He had offered a room. He had offered kindness. He hadn't expected love in return. But sometimes the smallest act of shelter builds something far greater than protection. It builds home. And this time, neither of them planned on leaving.